Fleet Commander Verthel stood on the command bridge of the Eternal Conquest and watched the blue world grow larger on the viewing screen in front of him. It was a beautiful planet. He had to admit that much, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans that sparkled like precious gems under the light of its yellow star, but beauty meant nothing to the dominion of Kethra. And this world would soon belong to them, just like 43 others before it. Status report, Verthel demanded. His forearms crossed behind his back as his segmented eyes scanned the tactical displays. All 300 vessels have exited hyperspace successfully. Commander, replied his second officer, a young Kethra named Colvin who had never seen real combat. We are holding position behind the planet's largest moon as ordered. Verthel made a sound of satisfaction deep in his throat. The clicking noise that his species used to express approval. The Dominion had been conquering worlds for 6,000 years, and they had perfected their methods long ago, always arriving behind a moon or asteroid to assess the target before making their presence known. What do our scans tell us about the inhabitants? Verthel asked as Colvin pulled up the data on his console and began to read aloud. The dominant species calls themselves humans. Commander, they are bipedal carbon-based life forms with bilateral symmetry. Average height approximately 1.7 meters. They breathe an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. Their technology, Verthel interrupted, growing impatient with biological details that did not matter. Primitive, Commander. Extremely primitive, Colvin said with obvious amusement in his voice. They use chemical propulsion for their spacecraft. They have achieved only basic nuclear fission. Their most advanced weapons are fusion bombs that they have not even used in combat for many decades. They communicate using radio waves. They have sent a few robots to nearby planets, but their manned space exploration has not extended beyond their own moon. Verthel turned to look at his officer with what might have been surprise on his alien features. They have not even colonized other worlds in their own system. No, Commander. They appear to spend most of their resources fighting each other. This drew laughter from several officers on the bridge, the harsh clicking sound echoing through the metal chamber. A species that wasted its energy on internal conflict rather than expansion was hardly worthy of concern. This will be even easier than the Valkyrie campaign, Verthel declared, referring to the last species they had conquered, a peaceful race of artists who had surrendered after a single demonstration of Kethra firepower. Prepare the standard subjugation ultimatum and broadcast it on all their communication frequencies. Give them 72 of their hours to respond. Should we translate it into their languages? Commander, all of them, Verthel confirmed. I want every human on that planet to understand what is coming. The communications team worked quickly, and within the hour, the message was ready. It was the same message the Dominion had sent to 43 other worlds, modified only to include details specific to each target. Specious Verthel read through it one final time before authorizing transmission. Attention inhabitants of the third planet. You are hereby notified that your world has been claimed by the Dominion of Kethra, rulers of 17 star systems and masters of 43 subject species. Resistance is not advised. Your technology is primitive, and your military capabilities are insignificant compared to our fleet. You have 72 of your standard hours to signal your unconditional surrender. Failure to comply will result in the systematic destruction of your population centers until compliance is achieved. Do not test our resolve. The Dominion has never lost a conquest. The Dominion will not lose this one. Your surrender is not a request. It is an inevitability. The only choice you have is whether your species will survive the process. The message was broadcast simultaneously on every radio frequency, every television channel, every satellite communication system on the planet below. Verthel imagined the chaos that must be erupting on the surface as billions of primitive creatures learned for the first time that they were not alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors intended to enslave them. He had seen this reaction many times before. Some species fell into despair, others into denial. A few attempted desperate and futile resistance, but in the end, they all surrendered. They always surrendered 48 hours past. Verthel spent the time reviewing intelligence reports on the humans, learning about their history, their cultures, their conflicts, and the more he learned, the more confused he became. These creatures had been fighting each other constantly for their entire recorded history. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own civilization multiple times over. They had actually used nuclear weapons on each other. And yet, they had never achieved lasting peace or unity. They were chaos given form, violence without purpose, destruction without conquest. And yet they had also built great cities and created beautiful art and sent machines to explore distant planets simply out of curiosity. They were a contradiction that Varthol could not understand. Commander, Colvin interrupted his thoughts. We have received a response from the humans. Varthol straightened, eager to hear their surrender. Put it through. What came through the speakers was not words but music. Strange primitive music with guitars and drums and a human voice singing in one of their many languages Varthol did not understand the words, but something about the tone made him uncomfortable. What is this? He demanded. It appears to be a song, Commander. Our linguistic team says it translates to something about being fortunate offspring. The meaning is unclear. Before Varthol could respond, the music ended and a calm human voice spoke and accented Kethra, clearly using translation software of their own Dominion fleet. This is United Earth Command. We have received your message and wish to discuss terms. We propose a diplomatic meeting on the dark side of our moon. Coordinates are attached. We look forward to meeting you. The transmission and Dedverthal stared at the silent speakers for a long moment, his four hands clenching and unclenching as he processed what he had just heard. They wish to discuss terms, Colvin said with disbelief. They are in no position to discuss anything. Perhaps they do not understand their situation, another officer suggested. Primitives can be slow to grasp the reality of superior force. Verthel considered the possibilities. Perhaps the humans simply needed to see Kethra power in person before they would accept their fate. Perhaps this was their way of surrendering without losing face in front of their own population. Whatever the reason, there was no harm in sending a delegation. Prepare a diplomatic shuttle, Verthel ordered. I will not go myself, but I will send Ambassador Dex Rao with a full security detail. Let us see what these humans have to say. As the shuttle departed the Eternal Conquest and headed toward the human moon, Varthol returned to his chair and watched the blue planet turn slowly below him in 2 solar cycles. Perhaps less, that world would belong to the Dominion. Its resources would flow to Kethra Prime, and its people would serve their new masters until they were no longer useful. That was the way of things. That had always been the way of things. He had no reason to believe this conquest would be any different from the 43 that had come before, but somewhere deep in his mind, in a place he did not like to acknowledge, Verthel felt something he had not felt in decades of military service. He felt uncertain. The diplomatic shuttle descended through the darkness toward the coordinates the humans had provided. And Ambassador Dex Rao watched through the viewport as a small structure came into view on the gray lunar surface. It was a pressure dome, hastily constructed from what appeared to be modular components. Nothing impressive by Kethra standards, but functional enough for a short meeting. Primitive, Dex Rao muttered to his security chief, a scarred veteran named Garnash who had overseen the subjugation of a dozen worlds. They cannot even build a proper diplomatic facility. Perhaps they had limited time. Ambassador, Garnash replied, his hand resting on the energy pistol at his hip. They have only known of our existence for 2 days. and in 2 days this is the best they could manage. Dexral scoffed. Commander Verthel was right. This will be the easiest conquest in Dominion history. The shuttle landed beside the dome, and Dexral led his delegation through the airlock into the structure. 12 Kethra warriors accompanied him, each one armed and armored and ready for any treachery. What waited inside was not what he expected. 7 humans stood around a simple metal table, all of them wearing what appeared to be military dress uniforms of different colors and styles, representing different nations perhaps, or different branches of their primitive armed forces. They were small creatures, much smaller than Kethra, with soft skin and fragile-looking bodies. They had only 2 arms and 2 eyes, and their faces were disturbingly expressive, showing emotions that Dexral could read despite the difference in their species. Leader of the human delegation was a female with gray-streaked hair and lines on her face that suggested age and experience. She wore a dark blue uniform with many medals and insignia, and she looked at the Kethra without any visible fear. "Welcome to humanity's first interstellar diplomatic meeting," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I am Secretary General Chun, representing the United Earth Emergency Council. Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Dexral made no move to sit. Instead, he loomed over the humans, using his greater height and bulk to intimidate them as he had intimidated dozens of other primitive species. "There is nothing to discuss," he said. "You received our terms, unconditional surrender within 72 hours. The deadline is approaching. Have you come to accept our generous offer?" "We have come to present our own terms," Secretary General Chun replied, and she slid a tablet device across the table toward the Kethra delegation. Dexral stared at the device but did not touch it. "Your terms," he repeated, allowing amusement to creep into his translated voice. "What terms could you possibly offer?" "Terms of withdrawal," Chun said. "Your fleet has 72 hours to leave our solar system and never return. If you comply, we will consider this incident closed. If you do not comply, we will be forced to respond with all available resources." The Kethra security guards made sounds of contempt, and even Dexral could not suppress a clicking laugh. "You threaten us," he said. "You, with your chemical rockets and your primitive nuclear weapons and your complete absence of interstellar capability, threaten the dominion of Kethra." "We do not threaten," Chun said. "We inform you of the consequences of your actions." "There is a difference." Dexral leaned forward, his segmented eyes fixed on the human female. "Let me inform you of some facts. Secretary General, the Dominion has conquered 43 species. Some of them had faster-than-light travel. Some had planetary shields that could deflect asteroid impacts. Some had weapons capable of cracking moons in half. All of them surrendered or were destroyed. Your species has none of these things. You cannot even leave your own planet in significant numbers. What could you possibly do to threaten a fleet of 300 warships?" Chun did not flinch. She did not look away. She did not show any sign of the fear that Dexral had seen in so many other primitives facing the reality of Kethra power. Instead, she smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Dexral uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. "Commander," Chun said, using a title that technically belonged to Verthel rather than Dexral, "your species has been waging war for 6,000 years. Mine has been waging it for 300,000. You have conquered 43 worlds. We have never stopped conquering each other." She paused, and her eyes seemed to bore into Dexral despite the biological impossibility of such a thing. "You should leave while you can." One of the human officers, a large male with dark skin and a uniform covered in different insignia, leaned forward. "Let me put this in simpler terms," he said. "We have spent our entire existence as a species figuring out new and creative ways to kill each other. We have nuclear weapons that can destroy cities in seconds, biological weapons that can wipe out entire populations, Chemical weapons that cause death in ways your translators probably cannot describe. And we have 7 billion people on our planet who are very, very angry that aliens have shown up and demanded their surrender. Another human. This one, a female with short hair and cold eyes, spoke next. We know we cannot defeat your fleet in open combat. We are not stupid. But we can make this conquest cost you more than any conquest has ever cost the Dominion before. We can make you bleed. We can make you hurt. And we can make sure that whatever victory you achieve will be hollow and bitter. Dexral listened to these words and felt a strange sensation creeping up his spine, something he had not felt since his first combat mission centuries ago. It was Fernet fear of their weapons, which were primitive. Not fear of their threats, which seemed empty, but fear of the look in their eyes, the absolute certainty with which they spoke, the complete absence of desperation or pleading. These humans were not begging for mercy or hoping for rescue. They were calmly and rationally explaining that they intended to fight, knowing they would probably lose, knowing they would probably die, and accepting that outcome as preferable to surrender. Thexral had never encountered this before. Every other species had shown fear, had tried to negotiate, had looked for any way to survive under Dominion rule. But these humans seemed to view death as an acceptable alternative to submission. You are insane, he finally said. Probably, Secretary General Chung agreed. But insanity is a survival trait in a hostile universe. We have survived ice ages and plagues and world wars and our own nuclear weapons. We have clawed our way up from nothing to become the dominant species on our planet. We did not achieve this by surrendering to superior force. We achieved this by being too stubborn and too violent and too creative to die. She stood and walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of Dexral, looking up at him without any trace of intimidation. Your Dominion has never lost a conquest, she said. Perhaps it is time you learned what losing feels like. Dexral stared down at this small, fragile, impossible creature. We will destroy your cities, he said. Some of them. Chan acknowledged. We will kill millions of your people. Probably billions, Chen corrected. We have made peace with that possibility. You cannot win. Chen smiled again. That same unsettling smile. Winning is not the point, Ambassador. The point is making sure the conquest of Earth costs the Dominion so much that no fleet will ever come here again. Even if we die, we will die in such a way that our world becomes synonymous with disaster in your military records. We will become a warning, a cautionary tale. The planet that was not worth the cost. She extended her hand. A human gesture that Dexral vaguely understood as a form of agreement or farewell. You have our terms. 72 hours. We suggest you take them. But we suspect you will not. Either way, we are ready. Dexral did not take her hand. He turned and led his delegation back to the shuttle without another word as they ascended from the lunar surface. Gurnash spoke quietly. What do we tell Commander Verthal? Dexral watched the blue planet grow larger in the viewport. A beautiful world full of insane creatures who seemed eager to die rather than submit. Tell him, Dexral said slowly, that the humans have rejected our terms, and that they are either the bravest species we have ever encountered or the most foolish. He paused, remembering Chun's smile. Perhaps both. Commander Verthal listened to Ambassador Dexral's report in silence, his 4 hands clasped behind his back as he stood before the main viewing screen on the bridge of the Eternal. Conquest. When the ambassador finished speaking, Verthal remained quiet for a long moment. They truly believe they can resist us, he finally said, more to himself than to anyone else. They do, Commander, Dexral confirmed. I have conducted diplomatic missions to 37 species before this one. I have never seen anything like these humans. They know they cannot win, and they do not care. Verthal turned to face his senior officers, all of whom wore expressions of confusion and contempt. The primitives need a demonstration, Verthal decided. They have never seen Kethra weapons in action. They do not understand what they are facing. Once they witness our power firsthand, their foolish courage will turn to proper fear. What target do you suggest? Commander, asked Colvan Verthal, studied the tactical display showing the planet below, with its major population centers marked as glowing points. There, he said, pointing to a coastal city on one of the larger continents. This city has approximately 8 million inhabitants. It is close to water, which will provide dramatic visual effects when our weapons strike. We will send 12 warships to destroy it, then broadcast the footage to the rest of the planet. And if they still refuse to surrender, Colvin asked, then we destroy another city, Verthal replied calmly. And another, until they understand that resistance is pointless. No species has ever held out past the third demonstration. Orders were issued, and 12 warships broke formation, descending toward the blue planet in perfect attack formation, their energy weapons charging. Their shields at full power. Verthal watched them go with satisfaction. Within the hour, this foolish human resistance would end, and the conquest would proceed as all conquests had before. He was wrong. The 12 warships entered the planet's atmosphere and began their approach to the target city. They were still hundreds of kilometers away when the first human weapons reached. Then Verthal watched in disbelief as alarms began screaming across his tactical display. What is happening? He demanded. The humans are launching weapons. Commander, Colvin reported, his voice rising with shock. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They are coming from all directions. Our ships have shields, Verthal said. Primitive nuclear weapons cannot penetrate our defenses. They are not trying to penetrate, Commander, Colvin said. They are trying to overwhelm. The tactical display told the story in horrifying detail. Humans had launched everything they had. Nuclear missiles that had been designed to destroy each other were now arcing toward the Kethra formation from launch sites across multiple continents. Kinetic weapons made from repurposed satellites and space debris came screaming down from orbit. Swarms of small flying machines that the humans called drones carried explosives directly into the path of the warships, and there was more. So much more commercial aircraft, the primitive flying machines that humans use for transportation, had been loaded with fuel and explosives and aimed at the descending fleet with pilots still inside Thema, massive human warship. A seafaring vessel that they called an aircraft carrier had sailed directly beneath the Kethra formation and detonated its power source in a blinding explosion. The Kethra point defense systems worked perfectly, destroying incoming missiles by the dozen, vaporizing drones by the hundred, shooting down aircraft before they could reach their targets. But the humans kept coming. For every weapon destroyed, 2 more appeared. For every drone shot down, 10 more launched. For every aircraft vaporized, another pilot volunteered to take its place. And these humans, these pilots and soldiers and volunteers, they knew they were going to die. They flew their primitive machines directly into Kethra weapons fire without hesitation, without retreat, without any apparent concern for their own survival. Verthal watched a single human aircraft fly directly into the engine nacelle of a Kethra warship. The aircraft was destroyed instantly, but the explosion caused a chain reaction that sent the warship spinning out of control. The pilot had traded his life for a ship worth more than his entire civilization could produce in a century, and he was not alone. Thousands of humans were dying in the sky above their world, throwing themselves against Kethra technology with nothing but courage and rage and an absolute refusal to surrender. Verthal had never seen anything like it. Commander, Colvin's voice was barely a whisper. We have lost contact with 8 vessels. 2 more are reporting critical damage. They are attempting to return to orbit. 8 ships, 8 warships of the Dominion of Kethra. destroyed by primitives who had not even reached their own moon. Vorthal gripped the railing of his command platform so hard that the metal bent. Under his hands, order the surviving ships to return. Immediately, he commanded. All vessels are to maintain distance from the planet's surface. No ship is to descend below the outer atmosphere without my direct authorization. As the 2 surviving warships limped back to the fleet, trailing smoke and debris and carrying crews that had been reduced by 90%. Vorthal stared at the planet below with new eyes. The humans had won nothing. They had not defeated the invasion. They had not driven away the fleet. They had merely shown that they could bleed Kethra ships if those ships came close enough to their world. But that was enough. That was more than any primitive species had ever achieved, and they had done it in 17 hours. 17 hours to prepare their defenses, to coordinate their attacks, to turn their entire civilization into a weapon aimed at the sky. What could they do with 17 days, 17 months? 17 years. Vorthal did not want to find out. Commander, the communications officer spoke up. We are receiving transmissions from the planet. Put them through. What came through the speakers was not a surrender, not a plea for mercy, not even threats. It was music, thousands of songs in dozens of languages. All of them about the same thing: fighting, resistance, war, defiance, never giving up, never surrendering, never stopping until the last human drew their last breath, and then a voice, calm and familiar, speaking in perfect Kethra. This is Secretary General Chun. Your demonstration has failed. Our response has begun. We look forward to continuing this conversation. The transmission ended with a phrase that repeated across every frequency, in every human language, over and over again. Come and take it. Vorthal turned away from the viewing screen and walked slowly to his command chair. He sat down heavily, suddenly feeling every year of his long life. Commander, Colvin asked carefully, what are your orders? Vorthal was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Send a message to High Command. Tell them we require reinforcements. Tell them that the humans are not what we expected. Tell them that this conquest may take longer than anticipated. He paused, watching the beautiful blue world turn slowly below him. And tell them that these primitives fight like nothing we have ever seen. That night, as human music continued to flood every Kethra frequency, Vorthal sat alone in his quarters and read intelligence reports about human history. He read about their world wars, their civil wars, their revolutions, their genocides, their nuclear standoffs, their endless capacity for violence against their own kind, and for the first time in his military career, he wondered if the Dominion had made a terrible mistake. 3 weeks had passed since the failed demonstration strike, and Commander Vorthal no longer recognized the war he was fighting. The humans had not waited to be attacked again. They had not hidden behind their planetary defenses, hoping the fleet would simply leave. They had not done any of the things that primitive species were supposed to do when faced with overwhelming force. Instead, they attacked every day, at all hours, from every angle. The humans threw weapons at the Kethra fleet. Most of their missiles were intercepted easily. Their primitive rockets and repurposed satellites posed no real threat to ships maintaining safe distance from the planet. But the humans did not seem to care about success rates. They cared about learning. Vorthal watched the pattern emerge over the first week. Each wave of attacks was slightly different from the last. The missiles came at new angles. The timing changed. The decoys became more sophisticated. And with each attack, the humans learned more about Kethra point defense systems they were studying, analyzing, adapting, and then the boarders Vorthal would never forget the first boarding action. It had seemed impossible, laughable even. Humans in primitive pressure suits being launched toward his ships in modified rocket stages. It was suicide. It was madness. It was exactly what the humans intended. Most of them died in space. shot down by point defense systems or simply missing their targets and drifting away into the void. But some of them, a tiny percentage, reached the hulls of Kethra warships. They cut through airlocks with plasma torches. They stormed corridors with chemical propellant weapons that seemed like toys compared to Kethra energy rifles, and they died. Thousands of them died in those first boarding attempts, but they kept coming. For every 100 humans that died in space, one made it aboard a Kethra ship. For every 1,000 that fell in the corridors, one survived long enough to learn something useful. And those survivors, those impossible survivors, took what they learned back to Earth within 1 human month. Verthol received reports that the humans had successfully reverse-engineered their first Kethra energy weapon. A rifle taken from a dead soldier during a boarding action had been transported back to Earth and disassembled by human scientists within 2 months. They were manufacturing their own versions. Verthol called an emergency meeting of his senior officers. "They are learning too fast," he said, displaying the intelligence reports on the main screen. "At this rate, they will achieve technological parity within a year. That is impossible." One of his tactical officers protested. "No species has ever advanced so quickly. It took the Valkyrie 2 centuries to move from chemical propulsion to energy weapons. The humans are doing it in weeks. The humans are different," Ambassador Dexral said quietly. "I told you this after our first meeting. They do not think like other species. They do not fear death like other species. And they learn faster than any species we have encountered." "How?" demanded the tactical officer. "How can primitives possibly compete with 6,000 years of Kethra technology?" Dexral was silent for a moment, then spoke. "Because they have been at war with themselves for 300,000 years. They have been forced to innovate constantly. Every time one group developed a new weapon, their rivals had to develop a counter. Every advantage was temporary. Every defense eventually became obsolete. They have evolved under a pressure we have never experienced." He looked around the room at his fellow officers. "The Dominion has dominated every species we have encountered. We have never faced a true competitor, never been forced to adapt or die. The humans have faced that pressure every day of their existence. They are built for this." Verthol listened to these words and felt the cold certainty of their truth. He had sent for reinforcements after the failed demonstration, and High Command had responded. 400 additional warships were en route from the core worlds. The largest reinforcement fleet in Dominion history, surely. That would be enough to crush these stubborn primitives. The reinforcement fleet arrived 2 weeks later, and Admiral Kethvern took command of the combined force. He was a legend in the Dominion military, the conqueror of 17 worlds, a strategist who had never known defeat. He surveyed the tactical situation with contempt. "You have let these primitives run wild for too long," he told Verthol. "Your caution has given them time to prepare. We will end this today." Verthol tried to warn him, tried to explain what the humans had become in the weeks since first contact. But Kethvern dismissed his concerns. "They are primitives, Verthol. They have no fleet, no interstellar capability, no real weapons. We have nearly 500 warships. This will be over in hours." The Admiral ordered a full assault on the planet. The combined Kethra fleet descended toward Earth in perfect formation, weapons charged, shields raised, ready to demonstrate the true power of the Dominion. What met them was not the primitive defense force of 3 weeks ago. The humans had built an orbital defense grid using captured Kethra technology. Weapons platforms constructed in secret, hidden in the debris of destroyed ships and launched satellites, opened fire with energy beams that Verthol recognized as modified versions of his own weapons. They had armed their primitive rockets with warheads salvaged from Kethra torpedoes, turning their chemical missiles into weapons that could actually threaten shielded vessels and in orbit above the planet. Something massive was taking shape. a structure that the humans had been building since the first day of the invasion. Its purpose still unclear, but its scale terrifying. But worst of all were the ships. The humans had captured 11 Kethra vessels during the boarding actions of the previous weeks. Most were damaged, some barely functional, but they had learned to operate them. And now those ships rose to meet the Dominion fleet, crewed by humans who had never been trained for space combat, but who refused to let that stop them. Admiral Kethvorn stared at his tactical display in disbelief. "That is impossible," he whispered. "They cannot have learned to operate our ships in 3 weeks." But they had. The battle that followed was the bloodiest in Dominion history. Humans fought without regard for their own losses. They rammed Kethra vessels with captured ships. They launched boarding parties in the middle of combat. They used every trick and tactic that 300,000 years of warfare had taught them. And when it was over, when the Dominion fleet finally retreated to regroup beyond the moon, they had lost nearly half their ships. Admiral Kethvorn was among the dead, his flagship destroyed by a human pilot who had flown a captured shuttle directly into its bridge. Vathal, now the senior surviving commander, gathered the remnants of his fleet and tried to make sense of what had happened. A message arrived from Earth Secretary General Chun appeared on the screen. Older and more tired than she had looked at their first meeting. But with that same unsettling smile, "Commander Verthal," she said, "we have finished reverse engineering your faster-than-light drive. We estimate we will have operational vessels within 6 months. At that point, we will be able to visit your homeworld. We are giving you this information freely so that you can make an informed decision." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Leave now. Take your remaining ships and go. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that Earth is not worth the cost. And we will let you live. Stay and we will destroy you. And when we have finished destroying you, we will come for your colonies and your allies, and anyone else who threatens our world." The transmission in Dedverthal looked at his depleted fleet, his exhausted crews, the wreckage of 400 reinforcement ships drifting in orbit around a planet that should have been a simple conquest. Thought about the 6,000 years of Dominion history, the 43 species they had conquered, the absolute certainty with which they had always known their own superiority, and then he thought about the humans, those impossible, terrifying, wonderful humans who refused to surrender, refused to die, refused to accept the fate that every other species had accepted. He knew what he had to do. Commander Verthal ordered one final assault, not because he believed it could succeed, but because the Dominion had never retreated without a final demonstration of strength. 6,000 years of tradition demanded that much. The attack was a disaster. The humans had learned too much, adapted too quickly, become something far more dangerous than the primitives who had received the Dominion ultimatum just 2 months ago. They fought with stolen weapons and stolen ships and tactics that no species in Dominion history had ever employed. Tactics born from 300 millennia of killing each other. They used terror, broadcasting the screams of Kethra soldiers being killed in boarding actions across all military frequencies. They used deception, broadcasting false surrender signals to lure ships into trap zones where hidden weapons platforms waited. They used sacrifice, strapping explosives to their own vessels and ramming them into Kethra formations with pilots still at the controls. And they used something else, something that Verthal had never encountered in all his years of conquest. They captured Kethra soldiers, held them for days, and then returned them unharmed. The first time it happened, Verthal assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps the humans had intended to torture or kill the prisoners, but had been forced to release them for some reason. But the released soldiers carried a message. A simple message spoken in their own language by a human with cold eyes. We could have killed them. We chose not to. Think about why. Verthal thought about eyes. Thought about a species that had every reason to hate the Kethra, every reason to want revenge, every reason to kill every prisoner they captured, but chose to show mercy instead. He thought about what that mercy meant. It meant the humans were not fighting out of rage or fear. They were fighting because they had calculated that this was the optimal strategy. They were demonstrating that they had complete control over their own actions, that they could be as brutal or as merciful as the situation demanded. They were showing the Dominion that they were not primitives anymore. They were equals. Perhaps more than equals. The final assault cost Verthal 60 more ships and 30,000 more soldiers. He ordered the retreat. The surviving Kethra fleet, reduced from nearly 500 ships to fewer than 100, limped away from Earth with its wounded and its dead and its shattered. Pride Verthal spent the journey home composing his final report to High Command. He wrote about everything he had witnessed. The failed demonstration, the boarding actions, the capture of Kethra technology, the impossible speed of human adaptation, the tactics and strategies that no other species had ever employed, and he wrote his recommendation. No Dominion vessel should approach the Sol system for any reason. The humans are not primitives. They are an apex predator species, whose development of interstellar travel must be considered an extinction-level threat to all spacefaring civilizations. They are too aggressive, too adaptable, too creative, and too willing to accept casualties in pursuit of victory. I have seen the future of galactic warfare, and it terrifies me. The High Command received his report when he returned to Kethra. Prime, they dismissed it as the ravings of a defeated commander. They stripped Verthal of his rank and his honors. They erased the entire Earth campaign from official military records. And they convinced themselves that the disaster had been caused by incompetent leadership rather than human capability. They archived Verthal's report and forgot about it. 3 years passed. During those 3 years, the humans did exactly what Secretary General Chun had promised. They built ships, not just copies of Kethra vessels, but improved versions, incorporating human innovations and human ruthlessness into designs that had remained unchanged for millennia. They trained crews, millions of volunteers who had grown up watching the invasion, watching their families and friends die defending their world, watching humanity prove that it could stand against the stars, and they planned the first human vessel to exit hyperspace above. Kethra Prime was small, a single ship barely larger than a shuttle. It carried no visible weapons. It carried an ambassador. Her name was Maria Santos, and she had been 12 years old when the Dominion fleet first appeared in Earth's sky. She had watched her father fly a cargo plane loaded with explosives into a Kethra warship. She had watched her mother die in the nuclear fire that followed the failed demonstration strike. She had grown up in the ruins of a world that had been told to surrender or die. She had chosen not to surrender. The Kethra High Command refused to meet with her at first, but then she presented her credentials, not diplomatic papers, but something far more persuasive, a star map showing the locations of all 17 Dominion worlds, annotated with human military assessments, estimated population centers, likely defensive positions, and projected casualty figures for full-scale invasions. The High Command agreed to meet Ambassador Santos stood before the assembled leaders of the Dominion and presented 2 documents. The first was a treaty of non-aggression, offering peace, trade, cultural exchange, and mutual recognition of sovereignty. It was everything the Dominion had never offered its conquest targets, everything the humans had never been given. "We are offering you a choice," Santos said, her voice calm despite the hatred she must have felt standing before the species that had killed her parents. "No species has ever offered us one. We thought we would try something different." The second document was simpler. It was a declaration of war, pre-signed and dated, ready to be activated if the treaty was rejected. "If you choose peace, we will be the best allies you have ever had," Santos said. "Humans are loyal to those who treat us with respect. We protect our friends as fiercely as we fight our enemies. We will share our innovations, our culture, our perspective. And together, we can build something greater than either of our species could achieve alone." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "If you choose war, we will come for you, all of you, every world. Every colony, every ship. We will not stop until the Dominion is a memory. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. You have seen what we can do when we fight for survival. Imagine what we can do when we fight for revenge." The High Command looked at the star map, at the precise tactical analysis, at the cold certainty in the human ambassador's eyes. They remembered Verthel's report, the one they had dismissed and archived. They signed the treaty within the hour, spread across the galaxy faster than light itself could travel. The Dominion of Kethra, conquerors of 43 species, masters of 17 star systems, had signed a peace treaty with primitives, had submitted to creatures who had not even reached their own moon when first contact occurred. Intelligence agencies from a dozen civilizations compiled reports. Scientists studied the limited data. Diplomats debated the implications. The consensus was unanimous: humanity was not to be contacted, invaded, threatened, or insulted. They were to be left alone until they chose otherwise. And if they did choose to make contact, they were to be treated with the utmost respect and caution in bars and trading posts across 1,000 worlds. A new saying began to circulate, passed from species to species in hushed tones, shared like a warning or a prayer. "There are two kinds of species in the galaxy," they said. "Those who have never met humans and those who never want to meet them again. On Earth, the survivors of the invasion built monuments to their dead. Billions of names carved in stone and metal. A reminder of the price they had paid for their freedom, and in a small office in what had once been called the United Nations, now rebuilt and expanded into the headquarters of United Earth. An old woman with gray hair sat behind a desk and smiled. Secretary General Chun had lived to see her species take its place among the stars, not as subjects, not as slaves, not as a conquered people, but as equals, as survivors, as humanity, somewhere in the depths of space. In a retirement home on a distant world, a disgraced commander named Verthel read the news of the treaty and allowed himself a small, clicking laugh. He had tried to warn them. Nobody had listened. But perhaps that was for the best. Perhaps the galaxy needed to learn this lesson the hard way. Perhaps every species needed to understand what the humans had always known, what 300,000 years of constant warfare had taught them. The universe was not kind to the weak, and humanity had never been weak. They had only been waiting.